Winston, are you ready for another episode of Viva on the Street? You are. Let's do it. All right, it's another episode of Viva on the Street, and it's back to back because we did one last night. We're going to do one tonight. And for those of you who are new to the channel, Viva on the Street started in January 2020 when the Supreme Leader of Quebec, François Legault, announced a COVID curfew. A curfew which was, at the time, contradicted in terms of science by our own health expert, Horacio Arruda, who said there's no scientific evidence to justify a curfew to combat a virus. And I started Viva on the Streets at the time in order to show, on the one hand, that this 1 month curfew was not going to last 1 month, and it didn't. It lasted 5 months. And to highlight the utter absurdity of the government response to COVID. We are nearly 1 year later, and we have gone from COVID curfew to COVID vaccine passports. And I did a video yesterday explaining the unconstitutionality of that in terms of the Section 1 of the Canadian Charter. Hold on, I'm just going to squeeze through here. They may not want to hear me talking to a camera. In terms of Section 1 of the Canadian Charter, the reasonable limitations of restrictions of our civil liberties as provided for by law, prescribed by law, as can be justified in a free and democratic society. And yesterday, I said, never in my life did I think I would hear the Prime Minister of Canada encouraging our premiers of the provinces to step up, and I'm saying, quote, step up, to violate our constitutional liberties, to impose a vaccine passport that the federal government would subsidize.
We will create a $1 billion COVID-19 proof of vaccination fund. If your premier mandates that everyone in your local restaurant or gym or other non-essential locations must be fully vaccinated and show proof, we'll pay for the development and rollout of that program. Already, Premier Horgan and Premier Legault have stepped up. And I certainly hope that here in Ontario, Premier Ford steps up as well.
And the Justin Trudeau government was saying not only are we encouraging the provincial premiers to step up, we're going to subsidize them with a $1 billion COVID app, vaccine app, a $1 billion app. How a COVID vaccine passport app could cost $1 billion is a question unto itself.
We will create a $1 billion COVID-19 proof of vaccination fund. $1 billion COVID-19 proof of vaccination fund.
We have the Prime Minister of Canada encouraging the premiers of the provinces to steps up, to impose a vaccine passport that the federal government would subsidize to the tune of $1 billion. Ordinarily, in sane times, but we're not living through sane times, the federal government would oppose provincial violations to charter rights as guaranteed by the charter. Ordinarily, the federal government would do that. Not only is the federal government not stepping in to challenge the provinces in their violation of constitutional rights under the Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedoms, the federal government is encouraging it and subsidizing it. And by they I mean Justin Trudeau, the other day said, we expect the prime ministers to step up, Doug Ford in particular, to the rest of the provinces, to impose a vaccine passport. And the government, the federal government, is setting up a COVID passport app in the order of $1 billion.
I don't know how it can possibly cost $1 billion
to set up this app, but whatever. The government's not spending its money, they're spending our money, and it's very easy to spend other people's money. In the same way, it's very easy to go to Vegas and gamble with other people's money. When you're not gambling with your own money, you're a lot more reckless. When you're not spending your own money, you're a lot more careless. So the federal government, spending taxpayer dollars, has promised, on the eve of the election, Justin Trudeau has promised to spend $1 billion of our taxpayer dollars to fund a COVID app. So set that astronomical, unreasonable, idiotic number aside. They've promised to do that. And Justin Trudeau, dangling this $1 billion COVID app fund at the premiers of the provinces, says we expect the other provinces to step up because François Legault has stepped up to violate our constitutional rights. British Columbia, I forget his name now, stepped up to violate our constitutional rights. Manitoba stepped up And now Justin Trudeau is saying he expects the other premiers to also step up, dangling this $1 billion COVID app fund over their noses. And lo and behold, 24 hours later, Doug Ford has stepped up.
And I certainly hope that here in Ontario, Premier Ford steps up as well.
He stepped up to spend $1 billion of our taxpayer dollars. He stepped up to violate our constitutional rights, funded, encouraged, egged on by the federal government. This is the absolute insanity that we're living through in Canada. Constitutional insanity, lawful insanity, because you have to appreciate these COVID vaccine passports have not been passed, prescribed for by law, as even designated by the Charter. They have not been prescribed by law. They have been issued by edict, by fiat, by health emergency orders. We're 2 years into a pandemic. We're 2 years into it. And they're still issuing health orders by way of public emergency, public health order edicts. No legislative process, no public debate, no evidence, no nothing. They just issue them. They issue them, and now the federal government is subsidizing them with our taxpayer dollars. We are quite literally funding our abusers. We're funding the government who is usurping our constitutional rights, and they're paying themselves to do it with our taxpayer dollars, and they praise themselves. They make themselves look like the good guys. They make themselves look like the saviors. Because, get over here, they're taking our taxpayer dollars and they're earmarking $1 billion for a COVID passport app. As if in any reasonable, responsible private enterprise, any app could cost $1 billion. I don't know what Justin Trudeau's thinking is going to be included in that $1 billion COVID app fund, but it got the attention of Doug Ford, who is a very principled person. And when he sees $1 billion being dangled for the provinces, and he says, me too, I want to get some of that, well, he just discovered his conscience. He just discovered that he's got to act in the best interest of his citizens, because he doesn't want to miss out on that $1 billion app. So now Ontario is going to implement a vaccine passport, an unconstitutional, unlawful, non-legislatively passed vaccine passport. And we are heading into an election, and it's not an accident that Justin Trudeau cannot walk the streets of Canada without getting heckled.
You're garbage, Trudeau! Fidel Castro, why don't you admit it?
It's not an accident that he cannot give any messaging from the streets of Canada. It's not an accident that he has to give his messaging from his bus, from private locations where the general public is not allowed entry into. He can only give his private messages in locations where he is reserved for himself, because the public has had enough. He knows it. And the only question is going to be whether or not he can hide it for the duration of this election cycle. He knows it. We know it. Doug Ford knows it. François Legault knows it. The people know we have had enough of this. And this election cycle is going to be a revolution, a modern revolution, in a way that people do not fully expect, appreciate, or understand. And it's going to happen. And I think Justin Trudeau thought he was gaming the system by calling an early election because he thought he was going to gain a majority or at least gain some seats. They see the writing on the wall. And seeing the writing on the wall, it's full panic mode. It is full blowing billions of our taxpayer dollars on provincial programs, on buying off the provincial governments. We see it, we know it, it's happening. And the only question is, how big of a revolution is it going to be? It's going to be huge. And we should all share the message to ensure that it's going to be as big as it needs to be in order to rectify the absolute government abuse and overdrive that the government has been into for the last year and a half. They think they can rule by edict. They think they can rule by unconstitutional fiat. It is not because they were democratically elected that they can do whatever they want. Democratically elected governments nonetheless have to pass laws through the democratic process. And if you are 2 years into a, quote, emergency and you're still running by emergency fiat, you are doing something wrong, and it is no longer the problem of the emergency. With that said, Winston, what do you say? What do you say? Have we reached the wit's end? This dog understands English. People, share the message. The world needs to know. With that said, peace.